Hello, and welcome to the fifth episode of the 2020 TravelConnect Virtual Series, Travel Recovery Trends to Watch this fall. I am your host, Peter Kane, Director of Marketing, Strategy, Content, and Brand for ARC. And today I'm joined by Chuck Thaxton, the Managing Director of Data Science and Research for ARC, and Rick Cini, Co-founder and CEO of 3 Victors. I want to start off today and thank all of our viewers for their continued participation with the ARC TravelConnect Virtual Series. And I encourage everyone to connect with us on your favorite social media channel using the hashtag TravelConnect2020. It's early October, and what's been a very challenging time for the global air travel community. With so much volatility in the market, earlier this year, ARC, BCG, and 3 Victors embarked on a journey to create a free and open resource for airlines, travel agencies, and others deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic called the Travel Recovery Insights Portal, otherwise known as TRIP. This portal takes a look at a set of data across the entirety of the air travel purchase channel, including government, economic, and COVID-19 data from sources such as the OECD, Oxford and Johns Hopkins, consumer sentiment via BCG, air travel search data powered by 3 Victors, and air travel transaction data powered by ARC. By combining these various sources, the industry is able to see a more complete picture of the trends influencing travel recovery and hopefully leverage it to better plan for their business's future. This is the second episode featuring this data, the last one being in June. So with that, we're going to get started, and I want to welcome Chuck and Rick. I'm going to start out by touching a bit on the economic and consumer sentiment data to kind of set the stage for search and then ultimately transactions. So according to the most recent OECD Business Confidence Index, the UK is seeing growth slowing as enhanced restrictions are starting to take effect, while the US economy is actually showing a steady recovery from its previous lows. Demand and output are both strengthening, which is critical for an industry like travel. Globally, consumer views seem to be slowly crossing to the other side of the pandemic. Shifting sentiment is logically most apparent where the virus has largely come under control. And many consumers believe various constraints, travel restrictions and quarantine requirements among them, will unfortunately, though, limit their ability to reach their activity levels that they desire. While 31% of consumers say they want to increase their leisure travel, only 21% believe they'll actually be able to do so as a result of these various restraints, whether that's government imposed or simply a fear of spending. In China, 22% of folks now expect spending on travel to be a lot less than usual for the next 6 months. Americans and Canadians hold a slightly more pessimistic outlook, unfortunately, with 39% and 45% expecting spending on travel to be much less than usual for the next 6 months. All that said, 65% of consumers say they are still willing to fly as early as next month, so long as certain measures are in place, like antiviral cleaning between flights, mask requirements for passengers, additional PPE requirements for flight crew, and even extents such as mandating proof of health certificates for passengers, whether that comes from a government body or elsewhere. So with that context, I'm going to turn it over to Rick, who will provide us with some feedback and outlines regarding the current status of search data. Rick?
Hey, thanks, Peter. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. So I'm going to be showing a variety of demos. There's a whole suite of different demos. But since this data actually closed out yesterday, I thought it'd be great to at least get a really recent version of some trends here. We've got a COVID dashboard here. This is undergirding some of those pieces, as Peter mentioned. This comes from Johns Hopkins, which is undergirding the part of the dashboard. You can see here, for example, a variety of interesting tidbits. I think when we first started the project, I think we were hoping it would have ended by now, and these graphs wouldn't be continuing, but apparently we're going to be doing this for a while. So that's also one of the things here. So what I want to do is first take a look at this year's United States raw airfare search trends. You can see, for example, right here, everything was looking pretty swimming starting at the beginning of the year. You'll see these humps right here. Those represent different days of the week that are being done. You can see a little bit in the United States right here where there was some optimism in May and June. Then some issues occurred in Florida, Texas, California, Arizona that caused some issues. If I actually take and mess with the moving average a little bit, you can see it's smoothing out a bit. here as well. So if I actually look at domestic, you can see this a little more prominently. You see this little hump that occurred in June, which is a little bit of optimism, and it's been pretty flat since then. Let's take a look at a couple other countries, for example, just to give a spin around the world a bit to our northern border here, at least for me. Let's show Canada real quick. You can see also a big drop off right there, but you can also see as we go to Canadian domestic, there's been a nice little, and let me smooth this out a little bit more. You can see there's been a nice jump in Canadian domestic in the last 2 or 3 months. At least it's trending much better than it was previously. I thought I would also bring in something like Australia, which had some early activity and looked like it was going to be heading in the right direction. You can see again here, again, it's sort of plateaued out here in search trends here. One of the things that we're doing as part of this, essentially the trip recovery tool is about looking at what we like to call green shoots and withering, at least we do at 3 Victors internally, which is country to country, looking at week over week trends and what's been growing week over week and what's been dropping week over week. And you can look at it in a variety of ways by volume. For example, if I take the United States here, you can see that it's about 8% up week over week. That's good news week over week. That's as data closing yesterday. You also have some green shoots from places like Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica. So we've got a handful of those Central American cities with some green shoots. That's good news. And then some things that are dropping off. Again, long haul travel has dropped off week over week, for example. If I actually click here and want to explore deeper into a variety of these, you can see United States here, and this essentially is 2019 versus 2020. The blue bars representing 2019 and where we are to date. And you can see, for example, Mexico and a few others here. I thought I would show, this is sort of the core diagram that's part of the BCG trip recovery tool. I picked Washington, DC here. This is all the different cities. This is city level of detail that you normally wouldn't get in that particular tool. But I wanted to look at a handful of cities. This is all the cities going in this past week. If I start to weed off some of the smaller routes, I can see that right here, for example, you can see Los Angeles is up over 7%. In a perfect world, everybody would be centered right here at 0, 0. If everything was the same week over week and year over year, the vertical axis is year over year, the horizontal axis is week over week. And if I start to add in a few more cities into here, you can see the green shoots over here again, another form of green shoot analysis. But the good news is you have places like San Francisco, Tampa, Boston, all with some additional ones, and then long haul still struggling here. With Paris, for example, not showing up. Again, I'll sort of show this same sort of search data. Now, this is the same search data, slice and dice with dozens of different visualizations. Here, for example, you're seeing the last several months of search volume, and then you can also see COVID case data that's now been combined into these, which is part of what's going on with the BCG trip recovery tool. And here's another example where we're doing week over week analysis. This happens to be Las Vegas. You can see the last few weeks. And when I hover over a particular item, it'll actually show the same COVID statistics, for example, for that particular one. This is the countries, which is part of the BCG trip tool. And then this is the top cities inbound, for example, to Las Vegas. Here we're actually looking at some data. This is the actual raw search data, so you get a feel for where the data is coming from. And in this case, again, you can see the top routes. They're still doing some nice recovery in places like Shanghai, New York, Beijing, Hong Kong. There's some additional long haul coming in there. Most of it's in the round trip category, and most of it's fairly close inside 15 to 30 days advance purchase. So you're not seeing a lot of people shopping very far out into the future. Here's an example of a little bit of a visualization. This is going back 6 months and forward 7 months. So you see a graph here. This is October travel, November. This happens to be from Destin to London, for example. So if I go back, for example, a few weeks and I show a time series data, sort of an animation of going through these week by week, you can see as it starts to rotate through these weeks, you can see, for example, again, it's close in, so you're going to see lots of data in this sort of October time frame range here. This is the country in this particular case. And again, looking at a variety of low fare search history, you can see even here, just adding a bit of faring data on here from New York to London, you can see cheaper prices all the way up into September timeframe for shopping, $300. You can see these price points really. This would be typically anywhere from 2 to 3 times cheaper than you would see historically. So Peter, hopefully that gives everybody a little bit of stuff. Clearly with the BCG trip recovery tool, you can explore even deeper country to country. There's several different ways to look at it by domestic and international, for example. And I'm sure Chuck will go over a few of those things as we go and look at the ticketing side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. That's really, really interesting. And again, this is just an example of some of the data that you can find in the trip tool. So Chuck, let's move from search to purchase.
All right, and what I want to do now is take a look directly in the Travel Recovery Insights portal. And this is the publicly available portal that we've done in conjunction with Three Victors and BCG. And I want to look at recovery trends sort of at a macro level globally. So looking at the recovery trends globally, over on the right side of the screen, you'll see the domestic trips are recovering much better than international travel. This is not only true in the US, but also in most global markets that we're observing at this point. Lots of reasons for that, not the least of which is the volatility in border restrictions as well as quarantine requirements that are in place across some countries and also keep changing to some extent as we see hotspots popping up. One of the other things that we're seeing that's a positive sign is September, October, and November travel, which you see in this middle chart, is showing a pretty good and strong week-over-week recovery. That seems to indicate that travel toward the end of the year, as we get into the holiday seasons in November and December, is recovering, and that's a good sign. We're not seeing the levels of travel that we saw in prior years, but we are seeing a anticipated growth, and that's a good thing for travel in the latter part of the year. If we want to look at the US specifically, we can look at tickets that are up about 2.6% week over week and around 70% for the year. So that's a good thing at this point. It's showing a fairly slow but steady recovery year over year, and that's a good thing for the market in general. No specific spikes that we've seen at this point, but the other thing that we're seeing is, if you see in this sort of a lighter trend here, we're seeing a lot more volatility day over day in the recovery period. What that seems to show us is that there is some confidence starting to be seen across the market. Whereas earlier in the recovery and at the kind of depths of the crisis, it was pretty normal to see everyone sort of traveling or not traveling at all. We're seeing some pretty good volatility in the short term, which seems to indicate that travel is kind of picking up in some areas and other areas are lagging. But that's a good thing overall. I'm going to filter this out a little bit, looking specifically at domestic trips, and then let's look at isolating just the US and see what's going on here in the United States as an example. So looking at the US domestic travel, and I'll look at October specifically. October is showing week over week change of a 25% increase versus last week. And this is a 14-day rolling average. through middle of September. So we're seeing a 25% uptick in tickets for flights leaving in October. Again, a very strong indication that travel is starting to recover, and we're starting to see some of those trends in a very positive way. We also see a 41% year-over-year change for travel in October. Very good, again, that we're seeing that sort of improvement. Airlines in the US especially have started to make some changes to refund requirements and things like that, and those are starting to be reflected in the marketplace with customer confidence increasing, so that if changes are required, they can make that without a significant impact. So those are good things that we're seeing. Again, a slow but steady recovery across the US, and that's a good thing. Let me move over to domestic versus international, and I want to show one specific country. There have been some reports recently that China has had a pretty good recovery, and we're seeing that in the data as well. So over the September and late October or late August timeframe, China has really kind of improved to almost 2019 levels for their domestic travel. Now, this is very different than their international inbound and outbound, which is still down, in the 90% range versus 2019. So while you've seen some reports of China travel domestically improving, we are seeing that here, but the international travel both in and out of China continues to be significantly depressed. That's a good thing to show that travel recovery is on a positive curve in China, and that's going to be reflected in some of the other markets as the recovery continues, as health and safety requirements start to be met and things like that. One other thing I'll mention here is we did some analysis on short haul traffic, specifically in the US, and the short haul or very short haul traffic of less than 500 miles, for example, seems to be fairly low relative to overall domestic traffic. Our interpretation of that is that there is still a lot of drive traffic versus fly traffic, especially in that very short range travel. So let's look at a little bit of the metrics by geography tab here on the trip portal. Let me narrow this down to just look again at the US and specifically round trips for this example. So what we're seeing on ticketing volume for the US round trips is, again, year over year, we're seeing a gradual increase. And this volatility that we're seeing goes from 50% to the low 70s to mid 60s. This is every day of the week. We're monitoring this year over year time series. So this is a very good trend that we're seeing in a gradual increase every day, every week. It's not going to be dramatic, but it is going to continue to recover over the next several months would be our predictions. Also on the departure month, you're seeing some very steady growth in like 3 to 4% month over month for departure months. Again, indicating toward the end of the year, travel optimism is beginning to increase. People are beginning to say they need to travel, and that holiday travel is continuing to increase. One of the other things that we're seeing in some of the ARC data is leisure travel is significantly ahead of corporate travel for several reasons. Leisure travel gives people a little bit more flexibility toward the end of the year in that holiday season. Plus, there are some economic factors continuing to hold corporate travel down as businesses continue their economic recovery. One thing I would like to show, and Peter referenced this earlier, and that is the consumer flying measures. This is from some survey data earlier in the summer, and the things that were most important to travelers, such as social distancing required, hand sanitizer, regular cleanings. If you look at the top 6 of these, 5 of the 6 things that were most important to travelers have generally been implemented by airports and airlines around the U.S. So this is a good thing. Temperature checks or health checks are starting also to get some attention. Several airlines have mentioned that they are starting to do those kinds of checks with rapid testing and things like that. But 5 of these 6 have already been implemented by a number of major US airlines as well as airlines across the world. Therefore, the airlines are paying very close attention to what people are wanting for their health and safety and implementing those kinds of things on their flights and at the airports at this point. So that's a very good sort of leading indicator that the airlines are actually listening to what is going to be important and are implementing those, and most have implemented it at this point. Let me trip back once to the domestic and international and give you kind of a summary of all markets at this point and kind of a macro view again of the world travel as we see it. Again, domestic leading international across most markets, but a very steady increase over time, showing that travel is beginning to increase. In the US specifically, if you look at this chart in the lower left, things that are in the upper right on this chart are best, and the US is sitting here better than most markets, but there are still a few markets, China we mentioned earlier, some of the other Asian markets, as well as Brazil, are starting to recover a little bit faster than the US at this point. But still, the US is fairly well positioned on its recovery path at this point. So that's what we're seeing as far as the global ticketing data that we've got at ARC, and kind of what we're seeing as far as trends toward the end of the year, as well as kind of what's going on domestic versus international. With that, I will turn it back over to you, Peter, and kind of bring us to a close.
Thanks so much, Chuck. I really appreciate it. I think this is really interesting information. I learned a bunch today, and I've been looking at this thing on a regular basis for the last couple of months. So definitely some room for optimism there. But as we kind of started this journey thinking, the most important piece being if we can provide the industry with meaningful data, it will allow our partners and our customers to better manage their own businesses and navigate this recovery. So thank you so much, both Chuck and Rick. And thank you everyone out there who's tuning in. To access the full trip dashboard, visit on.bcg.com/travelrecovery. And you can also find a link on top of ARC's homepage at www.arccorp.com. We will be back in November taking a deeper look at the future of air travel retailing, specifically how airlines, ARC, and others within our community are exploring the frontiers of omni-channel retailing and create more satisfying customer journeys. Lastly, we encourage you to watch all of our earlier episodes of the 2020 TravelConnect Virtual Series on the ARC YouTube channel, and continue to engage with us on your social media platforms with the hashtag TravelConnect2020. With that, thank you again to our guests and all of our viewers. Be safe, and we look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.